Simon is to my right and in studio with us just now, and the man himself is getting a huge reaction here at talkSPORT. Football finance expert, formerly advising clubs such as Manchester City, is football finance expert Stefan Borson. Stefan, you're actually a real expert in the field of litigation. I know that. You advised Manchester City. What were you advising them about?
Well, I advised City from about 2001 to 2007. So that's when we had no money at all. So one of our
David
deals
Bernstein.
At that sort of time, Alistair McIntosh was CEO at that point, and John Wardle was chairman
I remember
at that point. And clearly the club was living a little bit hand to mouth at that point in the way that a number of clubs are today. One of the deals that we did, we ended up doing a sale and lease back on the club shop for £3 million. You know, that's the sort of that's where the club was in terms of its need for cash.
It's incredible, isn't it?
And ultimately, my final transaction for them was the auction process before the Mansour one. So when we ended up selling to Thaksin Shinawatra, which I can see Simon is already smiling about. But you know, the reality is sometimes you have to do deals that you wouldn't ordinarily want to do. And City were in that kind of position at that time. Now, clearly, that transaction ultimately didn't go well, but it went well to the extent that that owner was able to access buyers that we weren't able to access, despite a very, very public auction. And that's why we ended up in the hands of Sheikh Mansour a year later.
I see. So your time at City was as advisor was pre-Sheikh Mansour, just so we can establish that. So when we come to talk about Manchester City and the 115 charges that they face, everybody seems, Stefan, to hit something of a brick wall. In front of the DCMS the other day, Richard Masters, top man at the Premier League, was saying, yes, a date has been set for the hearing regarding the charges that face Manchester City, but he won't tell us when. You've got your ear to the ground, haven't you? When is it, Stefan?
Well, I don't know when it is, because all anybody knows is what... there's a piece from Mike Keegan.
Why would that compromise anything?
Well, it doesn't compromise anything, but, you know...
So why wouldn't Masters reveal it?
Well, first of all, there is strict confidentiality clauses within the Premier League rules, so I assume that's what he's got in mind in saying he can't comment when it is. But there is a ludicrous situation that we have right now where we have this situation ongoing, and at some point, at some day that nobody knows, you know, nobody knows exactly when, an announcement is going to drop. Again, we don't know whether it's going to be in the morning or the afternoon. There's going to be an enormous announcement that completely changes, I would say completely changes Premier League football.
Like what?
Either way.
Like what?
Well, either that City have been cleared, or for me as a City fan, and you haven't revealed that yet, but somebody that's objective, I would like to think, you know, to the extent that anybody can be, and I think you know, football bias is a very strong thing, and
objective.
We have to. Did I say biased?
You said subjective.
Subjective, yeah. No, okay. Objective. You know, we all try and be as objective as possible, but you know, and that's what I'll try and be in our discussion about City. But you know, the consequences of City, of the charges being proven, are obviously enormous for the club and enormous for the fans. I mean, so you know, and the idea that the Premier League can say nothing until some mystery date sometime in the future, can say literally nothing. That's their plan at the moment. No timetable,
right?
No indication of actually what the allegations are beyond that list. I mean, I've worked, you know, quite hard.
Have you seen the charges?
Well, no, I've seen the charge sheet that everybody's seen, but you know, I'm able to decipher it because of my knowledge of previous cases and joining some of the dots and you know, and some of the things I've written are public on that. And so I understand the case, but most people don't understand the case, because why would they? It has never been explained to them. And Richard Masters sits there and says, well, we've agreed a date. You know,
it is similar, though, to the case that UEFA ran, isn't it?
I think it's very similar to the case that the UEFA ran. And that's it's
a simple argument that can be easily explained, which is that shareholders are funding the football club through concocted sponsorship deals inflating those sponsorship deals, representing them as sponsorship revenue, when really it's equity money going into the business. So you're representing Etihad or Essalat, that were major sponsors during this period of time, putting X amounts of tens of millions of pounds in on sponsorship deals which aren't what they say they are. They're actually funding coming from another business called ADUG, which is Sheikh Mansour business. That's what the accusation is.
Well, the accusation, I mean,
Or
City
one of
wrote
them.
themselves. If you look at, because it is similar to the CAS, I mean, City wrote themselves, the allegations made in these proceedings are serious and based on fraud and conspiracy involving City, ADUG, the sponsors Etisalat and Etihad. These are serious allegations of fraud and dishonesty. It would require a conspiracy, and that is the word City used. These are not my words. These are City's words. It's an allegation of fraud and conspiracy that's been made by the Premier League against multiple parties
and by UEFA, and one of which
So, Stefan, we try and make this
convicted them of.
understandable.
well, yes, but
Yeah,
of course
they did. They charged them.
They did. However, of course, CAS overturned it and said over 10 times that there was no evidence for the club.
I'm just trying to break this down for the layman, of whom I'm one. So, Stefan, here we go. You've said that in the months to come, maybe weeks and months to come, a day probably will materialise when there will be an announcement out the blue regards Manchester City. Either the charges are dropped and life goes on, or presumably the alternative, City are bang in trouble.
Yeah, well, not dropped. I mean, I think, any of
compared to Everton and Nottingham Forest, what's the scale of the trouble?
The scale is on a completely different level. I mean, it's there can be no question that that this will end in at least relegation, right? So there's no question if those charges are proven. There are a suggestion of conspiracy over effectively 10-year period. They're suggesting that City's main sponsorship agreements are not for, let's say, 50, 60 million pounds, but are actually for 8 million pounds, and the whole thing was a sham, and a whole load of people lied, and a whole load of executives from multiple companies were in on it, and
all
City
with
then
interest and common ownership.
Well, actually, some of them outside of common ownership, but a number of people were also vested interest, perhaps, and that the club also lied to multiple other parties, professionals, people doing due diligence on the company, the league, UEFA, the FA. It just goes on and on.
So you're saying
they just blatantly refused to cooperate to such a point that they got sanctioned even by CAS.
No, that's a separate point. I mean, if you look at the CAS judgment,
there's a tacit acceptance from everybody that's dealt with them, including the Premier League, that there is a blatant refusal. And even in UEFA's judgment, followed up by CAS's judgment, there is an absolute unequivocal acceptance that they've been charged with an absolute refusal to cooperate.
Yeah,
that's
these are separate.
That's why they got a £10 million fine.
These are separate matters. So there is a situation of refusal.
Well, it goes to the heart of what you're saying, which is the provision of information and people being prepared to provide information in certain ways and their integrity being compromised. If you're stymieing the flow of information, then there is an element of the manner in which you behave puts you in a situation where people can't get clear pictures.
I don't agree with that. I think you have to separate two things. You have to separate the battle of very serious allegations and the litigation that surrounds it. And I've been involved in English litigation regarding allegations of dishonesty, not against myself.
As have I.
Not against myself. I don't know about.
No, I bought one against one of the most difficult cases in English law, fraudulent misrepresentation.
So you will know. So fraudulent misrepresentation is a good example. You will know how hard people fight about disclosure of documents, about every inch of the way to try and stymie the other side. That is a normal approach to high value, high profile litigation. There is nothing in itself wrong with that, and I think that any innuendo or inference that comes from that is wrong. Now, I'm not saying they didn't breach the rules of UEFA in terms of their cooperation. They clearly did, and they were fined for it. But to be perfectly honest with you, it's not that big a deal compared to the charges that have been laid by the Premier League.
And in terms of the charges here, Stefan, if I can pick up on it, if they are found guilty of the charges that they will face, that they are facing, Manchester City will face at least relegation.
Well, it's just hard to see how it can be any other way, because you will have confirmed that if proven, and I don't believe that the Premier League will be able to prove a case of this nature in an independent commission. I think it's a completely inappropriate forum for a case of this nature. But if proven, this is super serious. I mean, there can be nobody would argue with that. City themselves in their submissions, I promise you, because they've said it to CAS, they will say this is an allegation of the most serious nature.
Manchester City say robustly they will clear their name. Do you think they will?
I think they'll clear their name, because I think a case of this nature has to have a level of cogent proof which seems to me to be impossible to present to an independent commission. And furthermore, it seems to me highly unlikely that the conduct that is alleged has taken place over a 10-year period with the sorts of individuals that are involved in the club and in the companies that are involved. It seems to me highly unlikely, and that also will be the starting point of any independent commission. Whether Simon likes it or not, that is their starting point. And it will be a very big call for any quasi-court tribunal to suggest that this number of people have been dishonest and have perjured themselves. That will be a massive call for effectively some KCs and maybe a former finance director of a football club to make against not just Manchester City, but against numerous executives, against some third-party individuals, and against, of course, potentially senior members of foreign states.
Same sort of argument as on with Enron, yeah.
Football finance expert Stephen Borson. It has been a hugely interesting, if intense, half hour. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks a lot.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.